As our story begins, an inferno rages. A timber yard has been consumed by flames, and the skeletal remains of a man burns beneath the cinders. As the fire brigade struggles to extinguish the blaze, an intrepid inspector and his constables scour the area for clues, thus beginning the adventure of the Norwood Builder. In his book, A Study in Celluloid, producer Michael Cox remembered, "This promised to be a rather expensive episode where vehicles were concerned. We wanted to make the fire at Norwood as spectacular as possible and started to search the country for Victorian firefighting equipment. Almost at the last moment, our production manager discovered that the Preston Fire Service maintained a period brigade, complete with uniformed volunteers, and they were happy to make the short journey south and appear in the film. The cost was much more reasonable than a budget-conscious producer had any right to expect." In the television Sherlock Holmes, Peter Haining provided even more detail. He wrote, "A highlight of this episode was the fire scene and the authentic Shand Mason fire engine used to put it out. Station officer Bob Bonner and 4 of his colleagues enacted the drama complete with London Fire Brigade insignia and fiberglass brass helmets." From the shops of Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes muses upon the recent uneventfulness of his practice, while his good friend, Dr. Watson, hearkens with good humor.
From the point of view of the criminal expert, London has become a singularly uninteresting city.
Well, I hardly think you'll find many decent citizens to agree with you.
Well, one must not be selfish. The community is the gainer and no one the loser, save the poor unfortunate specialist whose occupation was gone.
In his book, Michael Cox recalled, "Director Ken Grieve, coming fresh to the series, brought a novel idea to Baker Street, the notion of road repairs. He and his designer proved to me that scaffolding and traction engines were actually cheaper than horse-drawn carriages and a throng of pedestrians. So they carried the day." Arriving back at Baker Street, the duo is accosted by a frantic young man demanding an audience. Announcing himself as the unhappy John Hector McFarlane, he is granted admission.
Now, tell us quietly and slowly who you are and what it is that you want. You mentioned your name just now as if I should recognize it, but I can assure you, beyond the obvious facts, that you are a bachelor, a solicitor, and a Freemason, and an asthmatic. I know nothing about you whatever.
Your untidy clothes, sheaf of legal papers, watch chain, and your somewhat irregular breathing.
Why, yes, Mr. Holmes. I am all these things. And in addition, I am at this moment the most unfortunate man in London. Have you not read your newspaper?
Not yet.
Then, if you would allow me.
At about 12 o'clock last night, an incident occurred at Lower Norwood which points, it is feared, to a serious crime. a small timber yard caught fire at the back of a house belonging to Mr. Jonas Oldacre, a builder. Surprise was expressed at Mr. Oldacre's absence, and it became apparent that he had disappeared. An examination of his room revealed a safe which was open, signs of a murderous struggle, and a heavy walking stick with stains of blood upon the handle.
All I ask is that you don't abandon me. A man has followed me from London Bridge Station. If they arrest me before I finished my story, make them give me time, so that I may tell you the whole truth. I could go to jail happy if I knew that you were outside working for me.
Arrest you? This is really most gratifying. On what charge do you expect to be arrested?
Upon the charge of murdering Mr. Jonas Oldacre of Lower Norwood.
Dear me.
The paper informs them that Mr. Oldacre was found clubbed to death and burned in the fiery wreckage at Lower Norwood. Also, that Mr. McFarlane's walking stick was found at the scene of the crime. But as McFarlane attempts to continue his story, they are interrupted by the arrival of Scotland Yard's finest.
Inspector Lestrade, we have been expecting you.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Mr. John Hector McFarlane.
Yes.
I arrest you for the willful murder of Mr. Jonas Oldacre of Lower Norwood.
Oh, no, but just one moment, Lestrade. Half an hour more or less can make little difference to you, and this young gentleman was about to give us an account of this very interesting affair, which might aid us in clearing it up.
Well, there'll be no difficulty in clearing it up. Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
Nevertheless, with your permission, I would be much interested in hearing his account.
Well, Mr. Holmes, there's no denying that you have been of use to the force once or twice in the past. But I must insist...
All I ask is that you should hear and recognize the absolute truth.
I'll give you half an hour.
Sit down, McFarlane.
McFarlane explains that his parents were once acquainted with Mr. Oldacre, but that he had no contact with the man until yesterday, when Mr. Oldacre appeared at his office in the city, requesting that he assist him in the preparation of his will. But reading over the handwritten document, McFarlane was astonished to find that he, himself, was the sole named beneficiary. When pressed, Mr. Oldacre explained.
Many years ago, I knew your mother. Knew her and hoped to marry her. Then she met and married your father.
I had no idea.
Oh, then why should you? 3 months ago, I read of your father's death in the Daily Telegraph, and my mind was turned to your mother and to the son who might very well have been my own. This is my way of securing your future. I know that whatever I leave will be in worthy hands.
What can I say? But thank you.
Tonight's episode features fine performances by both antagonist and protagonist. The latter is played by Mr. Matthew Solon in one of his final acting credits. Solon found his way into show business playing in bit parts and uncredited television roles in the 1970s, but got his big break in 1983 when he starred as James Walker in the short-lived comedy Sweet 16. This led to him being cast as Edmund Swettenham in the 1985 Miss Marple miniseries A Murder is Announced. From there, he made appearances in a number of shows, from Jeeves and Wooster to the Lucasfilm series Young Indiana Jones, a series for which I've always had a soft spot. But in the 1990s, Matthew Solon stepped away from acting to pursue a life in business. And in 1998, he became the managing director at a professional consulting firm in London. But Solon never lost his creative drive, and in 2009, he merged his love of theater and business and penned the BBC radio play The Day That Lehman Died, which was awarded the Peabody in that same year. Today, Matthew Solon lives and works in London. Our antagonist, Jonas Oldacre, was portrayed by none other than Jonathan Adams. Born John Adams in Northampton, as a young man he trained as an artist at Northampton Art College and the Chelsea College of Art in London. A pacifist, he joined the RAF and did his national service as a nursing attendant in 1953. When he decided to become an actor in 1959, he adopted the stage name of Jonathan. He is, perhaps, best known for originating the role of the narrator in the London production of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, a role which would be played by another Granada series alum, Charles Gray, in the 1975 feature film version. But Adams wasn't left out of the movie. Instead, he portrayed the wheelchair-bound Dr. Everett Von Scott, scientific rival to Tim Curry's Frankenfurter and government expert on UFOs. The Granada series was also not his first Sherlockian role. In 1973, he played Finch in the Mystery of the Amber Beads episode of The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, where he appeared alongside Joss Ackland of Copper Beech's fame. Adams played many other roles over the years, notably the recurring character of Dr. Lejeune in BBC's Bergerac and Alexander Kravchenko in the 1987 obscure cult favorite, Star Cops. And as luck would have it, 8 years after playing the role of Jonas Oldacre in the Granada series, Adams would return to the Norwood Builder once again, playing a smaller but pivotal role in the 1993 BBC Radio 4 production of the story, starring Clive Merrison as Sherlock Holmes. But even with great success in the realm of acting, his original love of art never waned, and he continued painting through all his years on stage and screen. His final exhibition, Jonathan Adams in Wonderland, opened at the Riverside Studios in London in 2005, the spring before his passing. It was a collection of surrealist cartoons and collages that he had compiled over the years, and it was received with great success. Jonathan Adams died on June 13, 2005, of a stroke at the age of 74. But I encourage all of our listeners to check out his work at www.jonathanadamsartwork.com. I think you'll be glad you did. The man had an incredible talent and left behind an amazing body of work. Now let's return to our story. McFarlane, continuing to tell his tale, explains that Oldacre left in his possession some legal documents for consideration, and he invited Mr. McFarlane to bring the finished will to his house that evening, where they would finalize the binding agreement. McFarlane concurred, and that night made his way to his benefactor's estate, where, in the late hours of the night, the completed documents were sealed. Exhausted, but eager to depart, McFarlane suddenly realized that his walking stick was nowhere to be found. But Oldacre assured him that he would return the stick later, and hastily ushered him along.
I left him there. The safe was open, and the documents were on his desk. It was too late to go back to Blackheath, and so I spent the night at an hotel in Norwood. I knew nothing more of this horrible affair until this morning.
Do you have the original draft of the will that Oldacre brought you?
Why, yes, I have it here.
May I retain this for 24 hours, Inspector?
If it would amuse you. Well, anything more you'd like to ask, Mr. Holmes?
Not until I've been to Blackheath.
You mean Norwood?
No doubt that is what I must have meant.
Lestrade escorts McFarlane from the building and into custody, but Holmes is troubled by the scraps of paper now in his possession.
There are certain points about this document, are there not, Watson?
Well, I can read the first 2 lines, and these in the middle of the second page, and 1 or 2 at the end. I mean, they're as clear as print, but the writing in between is very bad, and there's several places where I can't read it at all.
What do you make of that?
What do you make of it?
That it was written on a train. The good writing represents stations, the bad writing movement, and the very bad writing...
Passing over the points.
A scientific expert would pronounce at once that it was drawn up on a suburban line, since nowhere, save in the immediate vicinity of a great city, could there be so quick a succession of points. Granting that his whole journey was occupied in drawing up the will, then the train must have been an express, stopping only once between Norwood and London Bridge.
Yes, but it's curious, is it not, that a man should draw up so important a document in so haphazard a fashion?
Yes, it suggests that he thought it was going to be of no practical importance.
Well, he drew up his death warrant at the same time.
This case is not clear to me. Come, Watson!
Together, Holmes and Watson make their way to Blackheath, where they question McFarlane's grieving mother. She admits to having been engaged to Jonas Oldacre, but when instead she chose to marry a better, if poorer man, she received on her wedding day a photo from her ex-fiancé of herself, shamefully defaced and mutilated with a knife, along with a note cursing her name and promising never to forgive her.
And yet he does seem to have forgiven you. After all, to leave his entire estate to your son.
Neither my son nor I want anything from that wicked man, dead or alive.
Mrs. McFarlane, the fact remains that the will was made.
I simply can't understand it. Why?
Have you ever spoken of Oldacre to your son? I mean, perhaps told him what you've just told me now?
No, never.
Never?
He found the photograph. My husband tried to make light of it, but he insisted. My husband told him something of the truth. That's all.
And the boy was disturbed?
He was upset, naturally.
You see, Mrs. McFarlane, what the police might say is that if he had heard of Oldacre's behavior toward you, it would predispose him toward hatred and violence. And so their case against him would be considerably strengthened.
No. There is a God in heaven, Mr. Holmes. And that same God who's punished that wicked man will show in his own good time. My son's hands are guiltless of his blood.
Mrs. McFarlane is portrayed here by Helen Ryan. Miss Ryan has the distinction of being one of the few actors cast to play multiple different parts in the Granada series, as she will appear again much later in the Mazarin Stone in the role of the Princess of Wales, a casting oversight that Michael Cox was not thrilled by. But we will come back to that in a later episode. Suffice to say that Helen Ryan is superb here, as she invariably is, having acted since 1965, even being recognized with a BAFTA nomination for her portrayal of Queen Alexandra in the 1975 British series Edward VII. Born in 1938 in Liverpool, she has always had a penchant for portraying royalty, and is certainly well remembered by many for portraying the regal Princess Alexandra in David Lynch's 1980 film, The Elephant Man. Helen Ryan is still working today, at the age of 81. The other lady of the hour is, of course, Mrs. Lexington, Oldacre's housekeeper, played by Rosalie Crutchley. Crutchley spent her entire life on the stage and screen, making her stage debut in 1932 at age 12, and working constantly until the year of her death in 1997. Along the way, she appeared in countless television classics, from Maigret and Midsummer Murders to Poirot and The Prisoner. Also appearing in dozens of films, from The Man of La Mancha with Peter O'Toole to an amusing cameo as a brusquely inquisitive guest in the 1994 film 4 Weddings and a Funeral. She even won an International Television Award for her portrayal of Catherine Parr in The 6 Wives of Henry VIII. I always think of her as spooky Mrs. Dudley in Robert Wise's 1963 classic horror film, The Haunting, who won't stay in Hill House after dark. When asked why she was so often cast in Spanish, French, and Italian roles, she simply replied, "I do not know why this should be. Perhaps I simply look foreign." Rosalie Sylvia Crutchley died on July 28, 1997, in London. Later, Holmes and Watson arrive at the smoldering remains of the Norwood fire, where they are met by Inspector Lestrade, who shares the evidence of trouser buttons found in the cinders bearing the name of Mr. Oldacre's tailor. Meanwhile, Watson inspects the charred ruins.
Presumably the organic remains have been removed to the laboratory.
They have, Doctor, though they'll be of little use, I suspect. The poor devil was no more than bone and cinder.
How very convenient for the murderer.
Not, I might venture, for Mr. Oldacre.
Nevertheless, Inspector, bone and cinder.
Thank heavens he was wearing his trousers.
Inside the house, they examine McFarlane's walking stick, which shows stains of blood upon the handle. Afterward, Holmes satisfies himself as to the floor, only to find that the crime scene has been trampled upon by Lestrade's experts, rendering it useless. Confirming with the inspector that nothing has been removed, Holmes requests to speak to Mrs. Lexington, the housekeeper. But as they await her arrival, the great detective second-guesses himself.
Could it be that for once Lestrade is on the right track? All my instincts are one way and all the facts are the other.
As Mrs. Lexington enters, Holmes asks her to recount the events of the previous evening, and her story appears to correspond exactly to the facts. Holmes dismisses her with a wave of his hand, but something doesn't add up.
It's all wrong. I feel it in my bones. Something has not come out. And that woman knows it.
Holmes, would you like me to have a look at these papers? Well, a man's bank account can tell us as much as his diary.
Correct. Thank you, Watson.
In his book, A Study in Celluloid, Michael Cox reminisced. We often rearranged the narratives in order to include Watson in scenes from which Conan Doyle had excluded him, and made him a contributor to conversations rather than a silent observer. These were changes to which, I imagine, no one could object. There is, however, another kind of revision in our treatment of the stories, which is more controversial. We sometimes tried to tie up the odd loose end which Conan Doyle had left dangling. He was usually a meticulous craftsman, but once in a while, he nodded. John Hawksworth believed that this happened on Thursday afternoon if Conan Doyle had agreed to deliver a story to the Strand on Friday morning. There is an example of that Thursday afternoon syndrome in The Norwood Builder. And we'll come back to that example in just a bit. Back at Norwood, Watson rummages through Oldacre's records, and Holmes inspects the grounds once again. This time, he spies something buried in the ashes, overlooked by the police, which he places into his pocket. On the outskirts of the property, he uncovers yet another clue: a series of rocks and twigs arranged in a pattern just out of view. Gazing upon the unburnt part of the house, Holmes begins to see the full picture. Moments later, Watson emerges, brimming with excitement.
Holmes? Lestrade did say that no documents had been removed.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
You found something.
No, it's what I haven't found that interests me. There are certain cross-references to various deeds, valuable deeds, none of which I can find. But one thing is clear. Oldacre was hardly in the affluent circumstances we have been led to believe. His bank account was practically empty, largely because he had made several large payments in the past year to a certain Mr. Cornelius. Young MacFarlane would have inherited nothing.
This is of interest. Why should a retired builder have such large transactions with a Mr. Cornelius?
Well, let's take our cab and see what we can find out from his city bank. You coming?
I'll stay here for a while.
Norwood Station.
That night, Sherlock Holmes roasts a potato on the end of a stick at a communal bonfire of the Norwood homeless. Disguised as a tramp, he attempts to loosen the lips of another wayfarer, sharing the warmth of the blaze.
I'm on my way to Folkestone.
I've done enough walking, I have. I finds a place and I stays put.
I used to meet a friend of mine here. Oh, you might know him. He's a seafaring man.
Aye. I know him. Shared my billet for the last 4 nights, he does. And off he goes. Without even a word. You take my tip. Steer clear of him. He's a liar.
Didn't strike me as such.
He goes up to that big house, he does. Comes back here and tells some yarn about them putting out with open hands and telling him to come back tomorrow and they'll give him some grub and some cast-offs for him.
Well, how's that lying?
Because, my friend, I'd already paid my call and nearly got the law on my back for my insolence. Insolence?
Perhaps he told him a pleasing tale.
Are you saying that a drunken sailor has more to offer than a sergeant in the 22nd?
No.
No.
Once again, Michael Cox and Jeremy Brett locked horns over this moment in the script. Cox saw this scene as an opportunity to impress the audience with another magnificent disguise, utilizing a false nose, wig, and the like. But Brett was adamant that such an approach was wrong-headed. To David Stewart Davies, Michael Cox recalled, "Jeremy said to me, Holmes was taken unawares and would not have his makeup out with him at Norwood, Michael. So what he decided he would do is wash the grunge out of his hair and do a sort of country accent and play him as a totally different person, but not someone who looks startlingly different. Frankly, I was a bit disappointed. I wanted him to do something more exotic, but I could see the logic of his position, so we went with Jeremy on that. But I doubt that Watson or Mrs. Hudson would have been taken in." But there was also something deeper at play. In his book, Granada's Greatest Detective, Keith Frankel posited the following: Brett's reticence to swaddle himself in yet further layers of artifice may have been born of something altogether more troubling. In 6 months of concentrated exposure, Holmes had become Jeremy Brett's personal boogeyman, hunting and harassing him, infiltrating his subconscious, and turning his dreams into nightmares. It was during the making of the Norwood Builder that Brett resolved never to play the part again following the completion of these 13 pictures. To Peter Haining, Jeremy Brett explained, "I found after a time that Holmes was threatening me, and it got dangerous for me around the 10th film, The Norwood Builder. I began to feel there was nothing in my life but Holmes. Holmes is a very difficult man to live inside. He's obsessive and he's dazzling, and I became very weary in my psyche, my head. It was rather like being a violin wound up too tight. The thing was, I had become changed by the stories. I was marinated in them. They're pre-Freud, pre-psychology, and much wilder. You realize they're much more destructive and dangerous than you could have imagined. Holmes is his own special branch. He's a man who flirts with crime all the time, and I always think this rubs off. I have always believed that the best way an actor can stay sane is to leave his part behind at the end of the day. But when you're living away from home, as I have done in Manchester, the hotel where you're staying can become a prison. You close the door and you're locked in. Now, that can be all right for playing a difficult part like Sherlock Holmes, because it prevents any distractions. The isolation can be wonderful for the part, for a time, but it is definitely not good for your lifestyle. In October of 1983, I started dreaming about Holmes, and the dreams turned into nightmares. He had worn me threadbare. I was over-Holmesed. Back at Baker Street, Holmes scratches out a few sour notes on his violin before tossing it aside in dismay. Morosely, he sits in his dressing gown, completely at a loss as to the case. Watson enters, and finding his colleague in a state of such depression, attempts to do his best to lift the spirits of his friend.
Holmes, you must permit yourself some food. You must eat.
At present, I cannot afford energy and nerve force for digestion.
Well, you must if you intend to pursue this case.
I fear, my dear fellow, that our case will end ingloriously by Lestrade hanging our client, which will certainly be a triumph for Scotland Yard. There's a telegram.
Important fresh evidence to hand. MacFarlane's guilt definitely established. Advise you to abandon case Lestrade.
It is Lestrade's little cockadoodle of victory.
Watson has no words to console his friend, but he gently picks up the battered violin and tries to encourage him all the same.
Let's have some breakfast. And then go out together and see what we can do.
I feel as if I shall need your company and moral support today.
Back at Norwood, Holmes and Watson meet with the cocksure Inspector Lestrade, who is eager to reveal a newly found clue.
Ah, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. I think you will acknowledge that we're just a little in front of you this time. This is where the housekeeper left MacFarlane's hat and stick, and this is also where he would have come to collect his hat after the crime was committed. Now look at this. A thumb mark.
So I observe.
A thumb mark in blood. You are aware that no two thumb marks are alike.
I have heard something of the kind.
Identical. And that was taken from MacFarlane this morning.
Definitely the same thumb mark.
And that is final.
Quite final.
Sherlock Holmes crosses paths with many a Scotland Yard foil in the Granada series, but none so memorable as the one Conan Doyle described as a little, sallow, rat-faced, dark-eyed fellow. So let's take just a moment to meet our Inspector Lestrade, Mr. Colin Jeavons. Born in Newport, Wales on October 20th, 1929, Colin Abel Jeavons seemed destined to act. At age 15, while playing the tramp at the West Bromwich Drama Festival, he was spotted by the head of the Birmingham Drama Department and offered a scholarship, which he joyously accepted. From there, he would go on to hone his craft, training at, among other places, the Old Vic. Jeavons made the transition to television in 1956 when he appeared on the series Nom de Plume in a supporting role of a cast that happened to include Peter Wyngarde, who would later play Langdale Pike in the Granada adaptation of The Three Gables. But Jeavons began his television acting career in earnest in 1959, when, at the age of 30, he began a long association with the BBC by appearing in both Charles Dickens' classics Bleak House as Richard Carstone and Great Expectations as Herbert Pocket. That same year, he played Henry V in BBC's The Life and Death of Sir John Falstaff, and his career only blossomed from there. With over 200 acting credits to his name, it's nearly impossible to encapsulate his accomplishments, but to name just a few of the highlights of Jeavons' work. In 1967, he played the role of Damon in the underwater menace story arc of Doctor Who, opposite Patrick Troughton's Doctor. He played Mr. Quartleplean in the BBC Douglas Adams production of A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in 1981. In 1985, he even stepped into the role of Adolf Hitler in a made-for-TV movie, Portrait in Evil, where he acted alongside Bill Nighy, David Warner, and John Shea. But Jeavons was still making a splash well into the 90s when he played the role of Junior Whip and ruthless political henchman Tim Stamper in the award-winning series House of Cards. He also returned for the 1993 follow-up series to play the King. One of his final TV appearances was that of a shifty train passenger in Lucasfilm's Young Indiana Jones Chronicles of 1993. And while he is certainly best remembered by many for his work on the Granada Holmes series, it wasn't his only foray into a Conan Doyle character. In 1983, he stepped into the shoes of none other than the great detective's arch-nemesis, Professor Moriarty, in the short-lived series The Baker Street Boys, a non-canonical show which centered around Wiggins and the other irregulars as they worked to help Holmes solve his cases from the periphery. According to author David Stuart Davies, Jeavons played the part of Moriarty with chilling authority. But of course, he will always be most fondly remembered by fans of the Granada series for his work in the role of Inspector Lestrade. Making just 6 appearances in the series, every one of his on-screen moments is truly memorable, from the Norwood Builder to the 6 Napoleons, to his final appearance in The Master Blackmailer. Jeavons adds gravitas and depth to each and every scene he graces. Michael Cox and June Wyndham Davies had hoped to cast him in additional episodes, such as the Bruce Partington Plans, Hound of the Baskervilles, and The Cardboard Box. But Jeavons' busy theatrical schedule made further appearances too difficult. During the shooting of Baskervilles, for example, he was on tour with the National Theatre Company's production of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which coincidentally co-starred Granada series Moriarty, Eric Porter. Then, in 1991, according to Michael Cox, Jeavons decided that The Master Blackmailer would be his last appearance in the series. In Starring Sherlock Holmes, David Stuart Davies declared, Lestrade was played with great panache throughout the Granada series by Colin Jeavons, who humanized and enhanced Doyle's rather sketchy portrait of the inspector. But I think it was Michael Cox who best summed up the contributions of this fine, fine actor. He wrote, "It's not a very rewarding part to play, but did any Holmes and Watson ever have it better? I believe in Colin Jeavons, we were given the best Lestrade of our generation. In 1993, Jeavons stepped away from acting. He expressed concern that his eyesight was worsening with age, and he was beginning to have trouble recalling his lines. But happily retired, he is still with us today, at the age of 90. Back at Norwood, Inspector Lestrade goes on to explain that it was Mrs. Lexington who brought the bloody thumbprint to the attention of the police. Seemingly resigned to defeat, Holmes and Watson move their investigation upstairs, where Holmes suddenly begins leaping from room to room, studying the layout of each. Watson watches, slightly confused, but patient. At last, his friend emerges, with a smile on his lips.
Sorry things look so bad, Holmes.
But there is a serious flaw in this new evidence.
What's that?
That thumbprint was not there when I examined the hall yesterday.
Holmes bounces down the stairs, his energy renewed, and he addresses Inspector Lestrade with coy confidence.
Inspector Lestrade, I cannot help thinking your evidence is incomplete.
What do you mean, Mr. Holmes?
Only that there is an important witness that you have not yet seen.
You can produce this witness, can you?
I think I can.
Well, then do so.
I'll do my best. How many constables have you?
3 within call.
Excellent. I assume that they are able-bodied large men with powerful voices.
No doubt that they are, yeah.
In the outhouse, there is a quantity of straw, and I would like 2 bundles brought in.
Straw?
And 2 buckets of water.
Water?
Ask them to bring it to the top landing, will you?
Upstairs, Holmes opens the window and instructs the constables to place the straw and water against a nearby wall. He then has Watson set a match to the kindling, and a gray coil of smoke swirls up from the crackling straw.
Now, we must see if we can find this witness for you, Lestrade. Gentlemen, would you please join me in the call of fire? 1, 2, 3. Fire!
Fire!
We can do better than that. Full voice, and together. Fire!
Smoke fills the room. Then, with a bang, a secret panel clambers to the floor, kicked loose from inside of a hidden room. The men turn, shocked to see Jonas Oldacre emerge from within, coughing and gasping for air. Holmes beams, and Lestrade stands in veritable confusion.
Lestrade, allow me to present you with your missing principal witness, Mr. Jonas Oldacre.
What's this, then? What have you been doing all this time?
I've done no harm.
No harm? You've only done your best to get an innocent man hanged. Listen, if it wasn't for this gentleman standing here, I'm not sure you wouldn't have succeeded. Take him.
Let us see where this rat has been lurking.
Holmes climbs into the hidden loft, where he and Watson uncover the missing documents, along with evidence that Oldacre had been hiding there for days, with the help of his accomplice, Mrs. Lexington.
How did you know about that place, Mr. Holmes?
When I compared the proportions of this room with those of the room below, I deduced that this fireplace wall was false. Oldacre clearly had a great deal of nerve, but not enough, I fancy, to lie quiet before an alarm of fire.
But how in the world did you know that he was in the house at all?
The thumb mark, Lestrade. When I examined the hall yesterday, it was clear. Therefore, it must have been put there during the night.
But how?
After MacFarlane had examined the papers that night, he resealed them. To do so, he used his thumb upon the wax. Brooding in that den of his, it suddenly struck Oldacre what use he could make of that thumbprint. Smearing the wax with a little blood, he made what appeared to be absolutely damning evidence against MacFarlane.
But what was the object of his deception?
Ah, well, you see, Inspector, in order to swindle his creditors who were pressing him, Oldacre emptied his bank account by paying out several large sums to a certain Mr. Cornelius. Now, I have no doubt that Messrs. Oldacre and Cornelius are one and the same person, the object being to change his name, draw on the money, and then vanish.
We see before us a very deep, malicious and vindictive man. Did you know that he was once refused by MacFarlane's mother? All his life he has longed for vengeance. If he could give the impression that he was murdered by the only child of his former sweetheart, what more bitter revenge?
I would never have allowed any real harm to befall poor Mr. MacFarlane, I assure you.
That's for the jury to decide.
You're charging me for a joke? It's nothing more than a practical joke.
It was nothing less than murder. The body in the fire.
But whose body was it?
An old sailor, Lestrade, who had fallen upon hard times. When I examined the ashes of that fire, I discovered that your experts had missed this. It is a tooth of the great white shark, and you see that it has been lightly carved. It is typical of the work carried out by seamen.
This is the Thursday afternoon syndrome moment to which Michael Cox alluded earlier. In Doyle's original story, Jonas Oldacre is found out, but there is actually no evidence of any human remains in the charred ruins. But without a body, the crime is only one of fraud. Dramatist Richard Harris embellished the narrative to add a more dastardly plot twist and to help bring the story full circle. In Bending the Willow, David Stewart Davies explains, to strengthen the story, the adapter, Richard Harris, has the villain kill a tramp and burn his body so that the corpse would be thought to be his. Harris based this conception on an idea uttered by Holmes early in the story, suggesting the possibility that a tramp could be involved in the crime. The additions strengthened the script and gave greater weight to issues raised by the original text.
You've saved an innocent man's life, Mr. Holmes. You've also saved me some embarrassment.
Ah, my good chap. You will find that your reputation has been enormously enhanced. Just make a few alterations to that report which you are writing, and they will understand how hard it is to throw dust in the eyes of Inspector Lestrade.
You don't want your name to appear?
Not at all.
His work is its own reward.
Holmes confronts Oldacre one final time, only to find him spiteful in defeat.
I'll see you hanged for this.
That privilege must surely be mine.
Original air date on the ITV network was September 8th, 1985, at 10 p.m. Dramatized by Richard Harris and directed by Ken Grieve. Now, we've met Richard Harris before, but it was under the guise of Paul Finney, the disgruntled scriptwriter behind The Blue Carbuncle, who, for reasons that may never be entirely clear, was motivated to remove his name from that episode and replace it with a pseudonym. This time, however, he signed his name to the work. And while this would be the last script he would contribute to the Granada series, Mr. Richard Harris was no stranger to TV, contributing screenplays to no less than 200 episodes of television spread across 60 different shows, including Man in a Suitcase, which he co-created, and The Avengers, to which he contributed 5 teleplays. And the Granada series was not his only foray into the adventures of the great detective. He also penned a 1968 adaptation of Black Peter for the BBC series starring Peter Cushing and Nigel Stock. And his work in the genre is well respected, having contributed greatly to the success of series like The Last Detective and A Touch of Frost. In 1994, He was awarded the Writers Guild's highest honor for his work on the TV situation comedy Outside Edge. Harris even dabbled in films, penning screenplays for no less than 10 movies. And a great deal of his work has been done for the stage, but he also won the Giles Cooper Award for his work in radio. So, Mr. Harris has, in short, had an incredible career. Born in 1934, he is still with us today, at the age of 86. Director Ken Grieve would only make this single appearance on the Granada show, but he too has a fascinating and successful body of work. Born on March 31st, 1942, in Edinburgh, Scotland, his first show business job was as a trainee studio cameraman with Granada Television. Through hard work, he quickly became one of Granada's elite crew, working the large cameras on any variety of projects, and was soon working as a director of dramas and documentaries, culminating in a job directing Coronation Street in 1974, where he and Granada cameraman Ray Good shot the Manchester footage used in the Coronation Street opening titles, which were used in every episode between 1976 and 1990, and which included the very first Cory Cat. From there, Grieve would direct many shows, including Bergerac, Poirot, 18 episodes of The Bill, and most recently, Law & Order, UK. But perhaps one of his most memorable contributions was his work with Douglas Adams on the 1979 Destiny of the Daleks arc for Doctor Who. During the filming of that series, Grieve and Adams struck up a friendship that would last until Adams' death in 2001. In 2009, Grieve was developing a film project with actor Hugh Laurie, but when he was diagnosed with myeloma, he withdrew from the production, returning to Edinburgh to be with his family. In his final years, he spent his time mentoring to young aspiring filmmakers at the Edinburgh Filmhouse's youth group in his hometown. Ken Grieve died on November 15, 2016, at the age of 74. Well, friends, we've made it through the Norwood Builder. Another great one. Now let's take it over to the armchairs, as we're joined by my brother and master builder, Luke. The yard's case here is one of the best. John McFarlane has all but confessed. It's too much, Sherlock fears, for a thumbprint appears, that John made, it seems, after arrest.
Only thing I would add to that is he could have put in nevertheless.
Well, Luke, we are back after a bit of a hiatus.
Yeah.
We've had some interesting developments in our lives, which I think we should talk a little bit about, but maybe we can wait till after we discuss the episode a little bit.
Sure.
Maybe just a quick teaser. Luke and I made a sci-fi feature film.
Oh, boy.
Called Intersect, and it's premiering in Boston, February 12th. How's that for a teaser?
Come on out.
That's kind of the whole story, but
that's it.
We'll talk more about it in a few.
And if you don't want to hear any more about it, don't listen to the end.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess let's just jump right in at the beginning. I don't know if you noticed this, because I sure never have before. The guy who plays McFarlane, Matthew Solon, no credit in the opening.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming it's a mistake, but I watched it 3 different places to confirm that maybe they messed it up on my Blu-ray, maybe they messed it up somewhere else. You know,
just because he wasn't a big enough name?
Well, he's a bigger name. Mrs. Lexington has a credit, so does the mother. It's really strange. I feel sorry for Matthew Solon.
Maybe he pissed someone off.
Maybe so. It's always surprised me that in that opening crane shot of Mrs. Lexington in the window, that you don't see the reflection of the crane, because it moves kind of up and to the side. It basically crosses the entire window right in front of her.
Yeah.
I don't know how they did that, to be honest. I mean, well done, but I don't know. It's a nice little shot, and you don't see the crane. You see the reflection of everything behind her.
I wonder if they just got up just high enough as it comes around, if it was just high enough over the window.
Yeah.
One of the things I always look forward to in that opening scene is Lestrade coming in arm in arm with a fireman.
Yeah.
Being led across the fire. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, Lestrade's big intro.
Yeah.
He's great in this.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just as great as he ever is and anyone else in the show.
Yeah.
He's really quite good.
No, it's a standout.
Colin Jeavons. I think I was saying his name wrong for a long time. Colin
Jeavons?
Jeavons, I think I might have said.
He's always a Jeavon to me.
Well, that's true. I got a couple emails correcting us on some of our pronunciations, which I'm always happy to get.
Sure.
The guys at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the podcast, they wrote in to correct me on a few things, including Martin Dakin, not Martin Dakin.
Oh, okay.
I was saying Dakin, but it's Dakin. And we've got a few notes correcting us on Z cars. It's not, I say Z cars because I'm American, but it's Z cars.
Well, there's an episode of Top Gear where they point out it's Jay-Z, not Jay-Z.
Right.
So
I guess I could be forgiven for that one. So I never really realized it before, but Holmes's intro speech when he's standing there in the shops with Watson, it's changed from the story. In the story, this tale comes post-Moriarty. So Holmes is talking about London becoming uninteresting because of the loss of Moriarty's presence, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But here, he's just talking generically, as though crime has just dried up, I guess. And I suppose it plays well enough, but without the reference to Moriarty now, whenever I hear it, it just kind of feels out of place to me. Like it's just missing a piece, and Holmes is just kind of complainy.
Yeah, I guess it's maybe like meant to be like the crime season is over or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does make more sense with Moriarty gone.
Yeah. But speaking of the very beginning, I love the opening shot, the long crane shot.
Yeah.
I love the shot itself, but I also love the fact that Watson he's reciting everything from the case histories which are in the story, which, you know, for the most part, it's actually kind of hard to hear. I don't know if every version of this part is the same in terms of the audio, but really with the music and the clacking of the hooves and everything, you can't really hear Watson talking about ex-President Murillo and Dutch steamship Friesland and all that. But with the subtitles on, you definitely can, and you can confirm that it's exactly the dialogue from the book.
Now, again, subtitle-wise, the subtitles on BritBox do not even show up there.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's like until they're crossing the street does it show up. Because it does sound like maybe it was, boom audio.
Right.
It wasn't, they didn't do any ADR for that scene, so it's kind of like it's just missing.
Yeah, yeah.
So more confirms that it's a bot on BritBox.
Well, yeah, probably. But I love that scene. I really do. I love the kids, enthusiastically shoveling manure with their bare hands.
Yeah. All the building props on Baker Street. There's really impressive old props and old machinery.
Even like the wooden scaffolding.
Yeah.
Like, there's a thing I read in the main show where the director of this episode convinced Michael Cox to let him do all that. And the way he convinced him was to say it'll be cheaper than having a bunch of horses and carriages. Like, we'll put up scaffolding, we'll bring in these antique, machines, and it'll be very interesting, but it'll be cheaper than the other alternative.
Than filling the street.
Right. But if you watch this,
it's
completely filled with people, with dogs, with...
It is. I wonder if maybe maybe he's right though. Maybe they got like a loan on all the machinery or something.
But I mean, it's such a full shot.
Yeah,
it's such a full scene. It's like I rewound it about 3 or 4 times just to kind of look at everything in the frame.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
The belt-driven machinery and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you notice, this is jumping ahead slightly, but it's when they come back out, there's a duo climbing a ladder.
Yeah.
And the guy almost kicks him right in the face.
Yeah.
But like almost knocks his hat off.
Well, yeah. And I mean, the obvious thing right there, horse pies.
Yeah.
I mean, they just walk straight through it.
Yeah.
And good on the actors, not caring, not paying attention, but they're just kicking horse crap all around.
Yeah.
And pretty real. I
Yeah.
wonder.
Realism.
Some interesting realism. But, in the in-between scene there, when they're in Baker Street and they're meeting...
The unhappy John Hector McFarlane.
Yes. The note I wrote down is, it's all very good and interesting, the way it was shot in there,
Mm-hmm.
but I almost would describe it as like bumpy cam work.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it is handheld, but they're just doing so many movements
Yeah.
that none of it's really perfect,
Yeah. Well, I made a note about that too. I wondered if it was a different DP on this episode just because of that. And we talked about this, not on the podcast, but we've talked about it, and goes back to this fluid style cinematography.
Yeah.
Back in the 50s and 60s was popular, mainly because they were saving time, getting multiple shots in,
Right.
or getting multiple angles in one shot.
Right.
My guess is just that they were using a dolly, and maybe they didn't have track set up, so it was a little bit bumpier because they were just running it quicker.
Yeah.
But yeah, that style of basically tight shots and always grouping people in together.
Yeah. It's done, frankly, masterfully well.
Yeah.
In this episode, the blocking of the scenes, Holmes and Watson passing in front of the camera as the camera moves, and then they're in a new position, and someone's standing up and someone's sitting down. It's the whole episode is that way, really.
Yeah, and props are that way too. Like
Yeah.
Holmes, especially like when he's holding the papers,
Right.
and we're looking at him reading the papers, and then he walks to Watson, and we pan down to Watson, but the papers are still in the shot as he hands them off, and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even when they get into McFarlane's office, it's like you said, it's like it would appear as though they were doing it in that fluid style to save time,
Right.
but it's really just a bunch of pieces that are done that way,
Yeah.
still cut. So it's like, it's almost as though, I don't know that it did save time. I almost feel like it was a trade-off that didn't quite pan out because they're all so sloppy. But honestly, I've seen this episode a gazillion times and never cared.
I
doesn't...
think it's just coming from a different time,
Yeah.
when we didn't have steady cams
Yeah.
and movies and things like that. I actually do like it.
Yeah.
And I don't think they did it to save time. I just think originally that was something they did because camera setups, like just the act of moving the camera to a new setup and changing the lights and things like that.
Yeah.
That's what adds time to your day. So
Right. But, getting a dolly shot just right.
But you only have to do it once.
Well, it's
and then,
true.
And then you have, maybe half a scene.
But it's a lot harder to do.
Sure.
Which is why usually when you see like a really low budget movie, there's no dolly shots because
Right.
putting it on a tripod is the easier thing to do.
But if you look at previous episodes, I think we even commented on it, like times when they did dolly shots, like when they push in on people, there's like focus issues because
Right.
that's the stuff that's really tricky.
Right.
Whereas with this, they kind of had a long lens on and they just grouped people in,
Yeah.
so something's always in focus.
Yeah.
So you can always look at something.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of that dollying in moment that is often used, different in this one, circles around him in kind of a crescent shape,
Yeah.
which I liked.
Yeah.
I was
Mhm.
glad they did. I don't remember how many of those they do later. I think it goes back to the pushing in a lot,
Yeah.
but I liked it. Well, speaking of them there in Baker Street, when John Hector McFarlane is finally taken away and Holmes is left with the will document,
Yeah.
that scene, I'm sure you know the one I mean, when Watson is seated there on the couch and Holmes hands him the paper and says, "What do you make of it?"
Yeah.
And that whole scene is just one long shot.
Mhm.
It never cuts.
Yeah.
And it's totally perfect.
Yeah.
They're both perfect for every moment of it. I mean, Watson's face when Holmes hands him the document, he kind of has this weird half smiling, half incredulous look.
Yeah.
And then every line, every look, it's just, there's no show on TV that I have seen in the past, 10, 20 years that could even hope to deliver a scene
Yeah.
so wonderfully perfect like that. I mean, people always say in filmmaking, when you don't cut, it's because you're trying to maintain suspense or
Right.
keep the attention. And I think in this instance, it was probably the director going, these guys are amazing.
Yeah.
We don't even
need
have to do anything.
Yeah.
We just hit record and it's going to be great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, I also like right before that, when Watson closes the door and he turns around, he's got this very worrying look on his face.
Yeah.
Just like, How are we going to get out of this one, Holmes?
Yeah.
One thing I wrote down, because I just guess I don't know what the purpose was, is when Oldacre says, bring the rest of the papers out of the safe.
Mm-hmm.
So he grabs half of the pieces of paper and then lets him grab the other half. Was that just to get his fingerprints on the safe or something? Or
Well, you know what it might have been is that because Oldacre knew that McFarlane would be questioned by the police,
you could say I did take papers out of the safe.
well, that they took all the papers out of the safe
Mm.
because they remember there were some that were not
They
there,
were missing.
which he was
Right.
hiding. Yeah.
Right.
So I think that was
I
probably...
guess that makes sense.
Yeah. So skipping ahead just a bit to when they're in the house, the Oldacre house, you know, when Holmes goes outside while Watson is examining the papers and
Yeah.
looking around, and Holmes, he's looking at the grounds, he's looking at the house, he seems to start to understand what is happening. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
why else would he survey the house that way with his stick,
Right.
looking at the size of the building? It seems as though he's solved the case, essentially.
See, I thought that well, maybe not solve the case, but I thought that at Baker Street, like, when they talk about, you know, that the body was burned, it seemed like Holmes already knew this was a setup.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just that he didn't have the whole case solved.
Well, right.
Maybe
And
he believed the kid and...
Yeah,
but-
and I could get that, but I feel like when he seems to have that aha moment, that epiphany, when he looks at the house and realizes that it's not measured the same, why doesn't he act on it right then? You know, it's just kind of weird because later he's so depressed, like he didn't
Right.
figure it out.
But I guess they don't show you that he did figure it out. It's just that he was guessing at it at that
Yeah.
point. Because he didn't go up and confirm it.
Right, but that's the part. I mean, that's the part that I find strange. You know,
Again, I wonder if it's just he assumed that he was in there somewhere hiding,
Hmm.
but he didn't go check. I don't know why he wouldn't go check if he assumed it. So I don't
right? Maybe he was trying to stack the deck so that he could have the most dramatic reveal
know. Yeah.
at some point.
Well, speaking of things I don't understand in this episode, and it's not really a big thing, but why would Mrs. McFarlane keep the torn up photograph?
Why would she keep it?
Yeah. Other than like evidence against that this guy's kind of a weirdo.
You know, I did think about that for half a second in the episode, and I thought to myself, well, maybe she just didn't have any other photographs of herself. I mean, you know, it's a different time.
Yeah. Here's what I look like.
Yeah.
I'll keep it in my drawer in case I need to give another photograph away.
But, you know, it could have been like her only photograph from when she was 18 or 20 years
I guess
old or
that's
something.
true.
and-
That's true enough. Yeah, maybe it was just still important.
Yeah, maybe. Something like that. Who knows? Maybe her favorite uncle took that photo and
Right.
it has sentimental value.
Yeah, that's true.
So, what did you think of Holmes's disguise in this one? Because in the books, Michael Cox talks about how he and Jeremy Brett really disagreed on this one. You know, Cox wanted him to do the full nose and wig job, etc. And Jeremy Brett said that wouldn't make sense because he was already out and he wouldn't have his makeup kit with him, so he'd have to improvise. I have to say, I mean, I think back in the day when I saw this one, I did feel a little underwhelmed by his quote-unquote disguise.
Yeah.
But I do kind of agree with Jeremy Brett here. I mean, I think it works just fine, and he puts on a good performance.
Right.
And frankly, we still get to see his face. I mean, in some of these disguises where he's got a big nose and, you know, a chin or whatever, and it just kind of feels, you know, over the top a little too much. It almost feels cartoony.
Mm-hmm.
This one, it's just him being a different person.
No, I agree with that. I think that makes sense. And I think there's no reason to disguise himself.
Right. He doesn't have to trick anybody into believing that he isn't Sherlock Holmes
Right.
in this moment. So, yeah, I mean...
I agree with that.
Yeah, I liked it.
Now, that is a departure from the book, though. That none of that took place.
Right. Well, yeah, and I talked about that a bit in the main show, that the fact that the tramp was in the fire was a, you know, addition of the author of this episode.
Right.
To kind of, you know, make it a little bit more strong. And
But I think that does make it a lot stronger.
Oh, I totally agree.
And it makes the episode stronger.
Yeah.
I actually really like that scene with him and the sergeant. I actually thought it was kind of a disservice to the other actor because it was such a great scene, but we just dolly over to Holmes and that guy's out of focus the whole time.
Yeah.
But it was a great performance.
Yeah,
you know?
no, he
it was a great
really good.
scene.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy Brett's the star.
Yeah.
I mean,
hopefully that will console him.
Yeah, in the original story, and we'll get to the books here in a second, but the rabbit bones that are in the fire, it's kind of like, and again, it was a great addition, which kind of papered over some we won't call it bad writing, but maybe Conan Doyle didn't think it through all the way. Because honestly, how long would it take to confirm that it's a rabbit skull
right
instead of a human skull?
But I see it. That's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Because in the true crime world, if anyone listens to true crime, I don't listen to that much, but I do know certain things, which is that it takes a long time to burn a body.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know that.
Right.
A lot of people will set a body on fire and nothing happens.
Yeah, you mean this wet bag of water isn't going to burn?
Yeah. But no, it's funny. This actually reminded me of a real case, and I can't remember the name of the case, and I don't want to get too dark here, but there was a similar situation where there was a murder, but the guy got blood on his pants, so he changed pants with the murder victim, but he just laid the pants over the top of the body and then lit him on fire, thinking it would just burn away, and then his pants were at least still there.
Yeah.
Which, reminded me again of this because of the buttons.
Right.
But then the police were like, why are their pants just laying on top of this guy?
Yeah.
It's just such a weird case.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of Watson's line in this episode. It's a good thing he was wearing his trousers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so moving into the annotations from some of the books, the Klinger says that this story was originally published in the Strand magazine in 1903, but it was actually published in Collier's first, October 1903, which I guess I never really thought that ever happened, but maybe I guess it did. Collier's got the story first. I mean, going across the ocean, it was probably very close. It might have been October 31st and November 1st, who knows? Yeah. But the manuscript for this story is actually in the Berg collection at the New York Public Library, which we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but we were just in New York. I wish I would have known. We could have gone and checked it out. Yeah. But the Baring Gould has another note on this manuscript, which I like these notes. I find them interesting, so I thought I'd read it. It says, "The original manuscript of The Adventure of the Norwood Builder, 50 pages, with numerous corrections, was donated by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to a Red Cross charity sale and auctioned in London, April 22nd, 1918, bringing £12. It was auctioned again in New York City on February 13th, 1923, bringing $100, and again in New York City, February 8th, 1926, bringing only $60. So,
that's a bargain.
Three years later, $40 less.
Yeah.
And it's presently owned by the New York Public Library. So,
even $60, I mean, even to say back then, that was still nothing. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, collectability maybe wasn't such a thing in those days.
Of manuscripts, I don't know, maybe. That's weird.
Most of the Klinger annotations for this one are actually comparative notes taken from that manuscript in the New York Library, which is interesting. It's also, there's really not very many. I mean, of the 20 or 30 pages of this story, there's only 5 or 6 that have notes on them. Yeah. But a lot of the notes that he does have in there basically indicate changes or deleted bits that Conan Doyle, altered as he was rewriting the story. One interesting deleted bit was a sentence that Lestrade adds when he's piling on to McFarlane. It comes right after a line when McFarlane is telling them that Oldacre didn't want to disturb his housekeeper, and Lestrade says, "A bad shot that, Mr. McFarlane," said Lestrade, with a cynical smile. "Jonas Oldacre is well known as a woman-hater. He has no servant except an old charwoman who comes in for 2 hours every morning, and he gets all his meals at the station restaurant. I warn you again that you are only making a bad case worse, and this will all come up against you." I just think it's funny that Conan Doyle, he really tried to drive home the idea that Oldacre was a quote-unquote woman-hater.
Right.
Because if he would have left that in, frankly, it would have made the story a lot more obvious.
More motive, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But it also kind of takes away the role of the housekeeper.
True. It kind of makes less sense why she would help him if he's
why she would be there late at night and things like this.
Right, exactly. Well, it's it's interesting to look into the mind of the author.
Yeah.
And see what he did.
There's a lot of interesting stuff in the story versus the episode, and just little lines that jump out at me, like when Watson's describing McFarlane, he says he has a weak, sensitive mouth. I thought that was a neat line.
Yeah.
One thing that always kind of threw me about this episode was that, like, the upstairs was unfurnished.
Yeah.
And, like, new plaster walls and things like that. And I always thought that was a weird choice on the part of the production.
Yeah.
But in the story, it says that all the rooms were unfurnished.
Really?
Which was interesting. That was just something that stuck in my mind.
I don't know why I didn't catch that. But I always just thought it was because it was probably like a trust property.
Well, that's the kind of thing I thought. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't furnished, so we just filmed in there anyway.
Right.
What a weird choice. But no, it's true to the book.
Yeah.
And the other thing true to the book were the hats again.
Yeah.
Even the really subtle details of the different kind of top hats used. Because Holmes's top hat is a very, like, a nice fur, like rabbit fur top hat with like a square edge. And Lestrade's is kind of a more rounded, cheaper type of top hat, which was I just thought that was cool that they did that.
Yeah, we actually got an email from a listener named Scott who was asking us our thoughts on the top hats, especially the one that Jeremy Brett does wear, because it is kind of a period-specific top hat. I mean, you can't really get them that way exactly.
I think you can. I'm pretty sure that that's a Lock & Co. Top hat, and I think they still make that today. Because they make, they were like the most popular maker of bowlers.
Yeah.
And they still make, like, their traditional bowlers and things like that.
Well, I know we both talked about that email because I wanted to look into it and get a definitive answer, but we just haven't had a minute to figure that one out yet. So if we get more data on the top hats, we'll report back.
Yeah, I don't have that much data, but I know it's just a dress top hat from that era. And I'm pretty sure it's rabbit fur, which is different from, like, felt.
Yeah.
Like, again, if you look at Lestrade's, that's a more common style top hat.
Yeah.
And that's Holmes's is like a dress top hat, so
yeah,
you might be able to search that way. But I do look at hats on eBay all the time, and Lock & Company or Lock & Co. They always have hats like that. I see them for sale, used usually, and not my size.
Yeah. Well, the Paget illustrations in this one, I gotta say, there are a few, but there's one in particular and it's the one where Holmes is putting his jacket on.
Yeah.
Where Watson looks really like David Burke.
Oh, yeah. I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good illustrations in this one.
And the top hat's in that picture.
Yeah. Well, let's start to wrap this one up. The good, the bad, the Jeremy. Let's talk about the good.
Okay.
Well, I mentioned the opening shot of Baker Street. That's definitely on my list. This belongs in multiple categories, but the moment where Jeremy says, Inspector Lestrade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the look between the two actors.
Yeah, and the way he, like, rushes and gets in front of everyone.
Yeah, but, like, Colin Jeavons kind of, like, peering out from, under his eyelids. It's,
yeah.
It's so perfect. It could not be more perfect.
Yeah.
It's flawless. It's a great little introduction.
Well, I have 5 comments in a row that just start with Holmes.
Yeah.
So it's a bunch. It's
Go
a
for
bunch
it.
of good ones. Well, the first one being Holmes just throwing Oldacre's paper all over the room as he's looking through them.
Yeah.
And, saying none of these were disturbed, and he's just chucking them all over the place.
Yeah.
His really annoyed, nevertheless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way he just dismisses Mrs. Lexington.
Yeah.
Like with his hand, just like, we're done with you.
Well, I would put all those in the Jeremy category.
Yeah, they're the Jeremy category. That's true enough. Well, then I'll save my other 2. Well, one more for me is the Foley on Watson's footsteps when he's coming down the stairs.
Which stairs?
When he gets excited because he finds something in the papers.
Oh, yeah.
He's coming to find Holmes in the garden, and it's like, it's these little tiny taps of footsteps.
Yeah.
I just think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, they added that stuff in. Lestrade's nod when Holmes says, "Not till I've been to Blackheath." And he says, "You mean Norwood?" And he's like, "No doubt that is what I meant." Lestrade just goes,
"Right.
I knew that's what you meant."
Yep.
Little nod.
No problem. No problem helping you there, Holmes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
"Nevertheless, Inspector, bone and cinder." Thank God he was wearing his trousers. That's just great.
Yeah. Watson's proud face when Holmes is saying, "Not so easy to throw the dust in the eyes of Inspector Lestrade." Like, if you just watch Watson in the back of the ground, he's just smiling real big.
Yeah. That's a good one. I really like the grounds. I like the house Oldacre's house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for sure, when you see it from the lumberyard side, I don't know that it's the same location, to be perfectly honest, but when they show the actual house and the green and the brush and the trees and everything, when the kids are running around and Holmes is chasing them, I really like the grounds. I think it's a nice little house. I much prefer the lush green of this as opposed to some other more of the sparse locations anyway.
I not to go off tangent, but I rewatched Musgrave Ritual again. And after, being there, I really had a sense of direction and like where everything was this time around. So it was nice to watch that too. And there were things that, like, when we were there, we were so rushed, and I thought, like, well, I didn't see the oak, so they must have filmed that somewhere else. But
I looked hard for that oak.
I know, but there was a lot we didn't see. Like the lake we didn't see, which was just around this other corner.
Right. Well, it's possible, if the oak was, like, in a totally different area, then yeah.
But that's what I was getting at, is, like, I don't think they traveled very much. I think it probably was there. And that's why I think that maybe the lumber side was actually in the same spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very possible. I mean, the oak, it's a huge area. It could have been anywhere, but it definitely isn't right outside the front door.
No.
Like it is in the episode. So, they turn and, they cut, and so it could be anywhere,
But
really.
again, I think if you live in England, you should go see that house.
Yeah.
Because it just... I don't know if I would say it makes you appreciate the episode more, but it feels more fun having been there.
Yeah.
And being able to go, I was in that room. I remember.
Yeah.
Like, and going like, I could see why they chose that camera angle because it hides this thing or something like that.
Yeah.
I didn't see the narwhal bone in that episode when I rewatched it. Maybe that was new. Remember the eagle lectern that was broken? Like the face was broken off of it or something?
I vaguely remember.
That was in one of the shots.
Really?
I think it wasn't broken then.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I said it before too. Like, I had a ton of fun watching that episode again.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to watching it yet again. Another great Watson moment in this one is when he says, "Holmes, you must permit yourself some food." It's kind of this moment where he's got a bit of a stern doctoring approach, and it shows his care for Holmes. His friend is so down in the dumps. And there's a moment there where he's sitting across from him and Watson's making the breakfast, and you almost think, it almost seems like Holmes is going to cry for a minute.
Yeah.
He kind of like cups his mouth for a second and says he's going to need his friend's strength and all that.
Right.
And they go out together. It's just, again, another really, really nice little scene. Really well done.
It is interesting, kind of character study for Holmes too, because watching him, you do think he's got this thing solved, but he's just 90% sure he's got it solved.
Yeah.
And that 10% is just making him so depressed that it's just an interesting look at him.
Well, my last note on the good side is the obvious one, which is, now everybody on 1, 2, 3, fire, fire, fire,
fire.
I think we can do better than that.
Again, and that wasn't in the story.
Yeah.
That like ad lib.
Yeah, but
So
it's just Jeremy Brett's timing in that moment.
I wondered if that was real.
Yeah.
I wondered if they were like, that was great, we're keeping that in.
Yeah. I believe in Jeremy Brett's skills as an actor to, know how to time his response to their bad.
Yeah.
But it was just, I mean, my God, it's just so perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you can't be done better than that.
Yeah. One note I had about, again, going back to the captions on BritBox, when the tramp is saying, he shared my billet for the last 2 days or whatever, they changed it to, he sheared my billy.
Well, maybe he did.
Maybe he did. We don't know what they get up to out in the woods after dark.
Well, let's look at the bad. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I wrote down there's hardly anything bad. I'm just nitpicking at this point. There's the bumpy cam stuff, which is a little, it's not 100% professional, so I could call that bad, I suppose. There is some rough ADR. There's one or two rough lines. One that sticks out is when Holmes is talking to McFarlane's mom, and he's like, "You see, Mrs. McFarlane, what the police might say is..."
Yeah, and again, for, I don't know if this isn't obvious to people listening, but he's at the back of the room.
Yeah.
And she's at the front of the room near the camera and probably where the boom was.
Yeah.
So it was probably just a case of he was so boomy and like, so they had to redo it. And it's hard to do it. It's hard to do it exactly the same.
And plus, it's not necessarily even the actor who's not doing it well. It can be cut badly by the person who's editing the audio.
Yeah.
So.
And if you're in a tiny room and you're not projecting across the hall like he was, it just comes across weird.
I mean, there is a chance that that was his actual performance, but that line always stuck out to me as being a little.
But it does feel very. The phrase, and boothy. Like it feels like it's a close-up mic, whereas instead of him being 20 feet away or whatever.
Right.
The only negative thing I can say for this episode is just that in terms of this season, this has to be the weak one.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's funny because I don't think about this episode that often, to be honest.
That's what I mean.
And yet,
every other episode in this season is great.
Yeah, and yet when I watched it, there's so many great moments. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the great Jeremy Brett moments yet, but it's full of them.
Yeah.
I mean, by comparison to later episodes, it really is top notch. So but you're right. For some reason, it does seem to stick out as the black sheep of the.
It's just when I'm watching it, I go, "What's the next one?" It's the Norwood Builder, and it's like, "Oh yeah."
Yeah.
But every other one, Red-Headed League is.
Yeah, I think part of it is because too, the villain, he's not really in it.
Yeah,
he kind of sets up the story and then he vanishes and he's not really actively in it. So it's kind of, you forget him a little bit.
Yeah.
There are a few places in this one where the lens edge or the matte box can be seen.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed that.
I noticed that, and my theory on that is it's during a crane move, if it's the one you're thinking of.
Where they're at,
when he's going through the garden.
Yeah.
And it comes out and it gets wide. Some lenses do a certain thing. When you focus, the lens moves in the barrel,
right?
And so the lens would go further back and you could see the hood or the matte box, and then when it focuses out to the wide shot, then it pushes back in. So they probably set up the shot and went, don't see it, it's fine,
right? Yeah, and plus there was kind of like lens flare in those moments. It was probably hard to see through the eyepiece what was happening or whatnot. My only other kind of negative note was when Oldacre and Mrs. Lexington are caught and Holmes is giving the whole backstory of what happened, they just stand there. They don't say anything. They don't move. They don't stand up for themselves or argue. It's just kind of odd. They're just kind of out of it. They're just kind of out of the game at that moment.
Well, that's true. But
benched.
Maybe they listen to true crime podcasts, which tells you don't say anything without a lawyer.
Well, what's funny is in the very last moment, and because he's been so quiet, it feels out of place to me, but in the very last moment when Jeremy Brett goes up to the carriage and Oldacre says, "I'll see you hanged for this," and Jeremy Brett says, "That privilege must surely be mine."
Yeah.
Look at Mrs. Lexington in that moment. She just kind of like turns her face to the front and it's just kind of no expression, like, we're dead. Like, it's just no expression whatsoever. And because it's no expression, it just feels weird. It's just off. Like that somebody forgot to direct them.
Yeah, see, that's what I think. I was just going to say, you know this, but I've been watching a lot of Seinfeld recently.
Yeah.
And you can tell when they have like a great guest actor versus an extra.
Yeah.
Because most people get a little bit of direction and then they go, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now.
Yeah.
And so you can tell they feel awkward and they look awkward in the scene. They're just going, don't look at the camera, don't look at the camera.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have direction, if you don't know what you're supposed to do, sometimes you just kind of freeze.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't blame the actors because they're both good actors. They've done a lot of stuff. I think it's probably a direction question mark, but
well, I'm sure it was.
Yeah, but it is odd. It kind of takes some of the air out of the end of the episode when they're just standing there.
But you've seen it too many times.
Yeah.
Because I look at Holmes or Watson or Lestrade or anybody else.
That's true. Well, then let's hop into the best Jeremy Brett moments. My first note is the way Holmes motions McFarlane into his chair while Watson's reading the newspaper at the very beginning. I mean, that's just what you call classic Jeremy Brett hand acting. I mean, I can't even describe it using words. It's like, it's like pushing him into the chair with his power of his hand.
There's a lot of it. I mean, like, just him reading the note and like handing off the note to Watson.
Yeah, you mentioned the one where he waves Mrs. Lexington away.
Yeah.
But my favorite part of that moment is where he goes, "Thank you, Mrs. Lexington.
Yeah.
You've been most cooperative."
Yeah, he just has a way about him. I mean, we were just talking to some people that have been getting into Holmes for the first time, or getting into Jeremy Brett, I should say, for the first time. And I always think about like stuff like that. That's what I tell people. Just the way the hand motions and things like that. When there's an episode where he's saying, no violence, and he like puts his hand in the guy's face and then just points to the door. Yeah, and it's just things like that. He gets away with it where other people don't.
Well, right, and that moment is pretty mean in this episode.
For sure.
He waves her away and dismisses her.
But again, I think he knows she's in on it, so he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't care.
Right. Yeah.
Or you could just point to him having a low opinion of women again.
Sure, that's true. I have a note here, Holmes perching on the smoldering ruins. I feel like, in a way, it was kind of a missed opportunity because it wasn't a particularly wonderful shot. You know what I mean? Like it was, but I just mean, it wasn't framed, the scene wasn't framed for that shot. It was more, it seems like a moment where Jeremy Brett went, this will be great, get this, and it was great, but that could have been like iconic, you know what I mean? Like
that's true.
It could have been really good.
Yeah,
it was good.
It was a little flat against the wall, but
right, a lot of background right behind him.
It could have been something where he's like, "We have any film left?
Yeah,
I want to do something real quick."
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an Americanism versus Britishism. We call it a backyard versus a garden. Because what my note says is when Holmes walks through the tiny garden patch, it's just this little, like 6 or 8 foot long piece of garden in this huge yard of grass that he just tramples through as he's thinking.
Right.
Just another Jeremy thing.
Yeah. Well, my last best Jeremy moment is his little half sad laugh when Lestrade makes the comment. He's like, well, I suppose McFarlane could have snuck out of jail just to add more evidence to incriminate himself. Yeah. And Holmes goes,
Yeah. He was very snidey in the book, too.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the end of the book, he's like, I had to get you back a little bit, Lestrade.
Yeah. But overall, it was, I think, a really great episode and a great introduction to Lestrade.
Yeah, definitely. And he kind of, smacks him down right in the first episode.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives you a weird insight into their relationship, that he's a snidey little dude and Holmes has to smack him down every once in a while, but they still work together.
But he's also not a total bungler in this one. He kind of, he's doing his job. He's doing it right as he can with the data that he has. He's just got a bit of an attitude.
Yeah, he's doing it right, except for he didn't do a thorough search.
Well, that's true.
And he doesn't know that you can't burn a body to ash and cinder in like 4 hours.
Well, apparently no one else did either, though.
Yeah.
But I just mean, I think as an introduction to Lestrade, they could have made him into a nothing.
Yeah.
And instead they made him into a layered character, who's not incompetent.
Yeah. And there was meat there. Yeah. Whereas some of the other constables, they're just in and out of the episode.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to Persian slippers. I looked at our Persian slipper voting history.
Yeah, the accurate Persian slipper voting history that we have.
Well, and I gotta say, I'm kind of surprised at how consistent we've actually been. I mean,
you mean in terms that we're correct?
Well, no, I mean in terms of not paying attention to what we've said in the past, and how they kind of fall together. Mm-hmm. I feel pretty good about our voting record. I feel like it's right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
but I think that's, I don't know about you, but I don't usually think about it until you ask me.
Right.
So it is like kind of gut reaction.
Right, exactly. And I think we should continue to do it that way because it's more fun, but also let's see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and it should be said, we were critiqued on the inaccuracy of our voting system.
That's true.
But really only because it wasn't enough decimal places.
Well, yeah, we had a couple of emails come in, some suggestions on how we could improve it and make it a little bit more consistent and reliable moving forward.
Well, but they can just move a decimal point.
That's true. Well, so far we haven't gone into the second decimal point, so I think we're okay. But I'm going to give this one a 9.7.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, because I looked at, that's what I gave Bohemian Rhapsody. What was I going to say? That's what I gave Scandal in Bohemia.
Scandal in Bohemian Rhapsody?
Yeah. I gave that one a 9.7. You gave it a 10. But,
well, it was a 10, though.
You see, but I never consider that one top notch.
Okay.
But I do, yeah, so looking at the numbers, I think 9.7 is pretty good. To me, this is better than Crooked Man. This is, I would say, even better than Greek Interpreter, but not as good as Naval Treaty, not as good as Solitary Cyclist or Dancing Men or Speckled Band or Blue Carbuncle.
Well, then I wonder if I'm going to be consistent, but here's what I'll say.
Yeah.
I had a number in mind, and I have been slightly influenced up, and I would give it 9.2.
I'm filling it into the grid right now.
Okay. It's 9.2, and that is in keeping with my scoring system. It was a 9, and then we found 2 buttons worth in the Ash and Cinder.
Trouser buttons?
Yeah. So I'd give it a 9.2. How does that rate against Crooked Man, what I gave it?
Well, you gave Crooked Man a 7.1.
Accurate.
So, yeah. And in Naval Treaty, you gave a 9.1. So you like this one just slightly better than Naval Treaty, according to our grid.
Yeah. Naval Treaty, yeah.
Yeah. But all the rest you rated better.
That's about right.
Yeah.
Well, then good. I was going to give it a 9. So, yeah.
Well, that works. So, okay, well, before we dive into a few listener emails, let's talk about a few things. There is the movie, which we'll talk about that in a second. But before then, one Sherlockiana moment we found ourselves back in New York City recently, back in November. Time really has been flying. But while we were there, we were able to make one Sherlockian detour on our trip, and that was to the mysterious bookshop on Warren Street. And, I mean, for anybody who hasn't heard of this bookstore, I actually heard about it because some of the old Armchair Detective magazines had an illustrated ad on the back cover for this bookstore. And it's still there. You know, those magazines are back from the 80s and before, I think. But we had just a free minute in between things. We stopped off. And if you have a chance to go, as a Sherlock Holmes fan, it is certainly worth stopping in.
Definitely.
This place is, it's a tall building with 3 walls full of books, and one of those entire walls is Sherlock Holmes books.
Yeah.
It's divided into categories, canon stuff and non-canon stuff and historical stuff and
games.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great.
It was.
We said, "Do you have any Sherlock Holmes stuff?" And they said, "Yeah, the whole back wall."
Yeah, and when you walk up to it, you realize that they're not kidding around. I picked up a few things there. I can't even remember exactly now. I picked up quite a few things actually, but Encyclopedia Sherlockiana. I got a copy of the Good Old Index. We asked them if they had Strand magazines, and they did. But they actually at that time did not have any with Sherlock Holmes stories in them. They had one that I think had like a Conan Doyle article or something.
They had a couple. They had like a bound thing of Strand magazine, but he said there was a couple of Doyle things in it, but no Sherlock.
Right. But they did have some Collier's magazines, and I took some pictures of them. They were a little on the pricey side. I mean, probably reasonable for what they were. I think the cheapest one was like $90 or $100.
Yeah.
And the most expensive one was, I think, in the $300 range. And I think that one was the Second Stain, as I recall.
Yeah.
And they were in different, conditions. They had a couple.
Neat covers, though.
Yeah. I asked them if they had the Blue Carbuncle, because if they would have, I think I might have dropped more money than I would have been in good conscience to do, but they didn't have it. But they get them in apparently from time to time. So
lots of neat stuff. Like I bought like a brand new book game that had like a cipher on the front, and it's like a mystery book.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also bought like an old bound copy of A Study in Scarlet, which I don't think it even has a date, but it's just a nice little old book.
Yeah.
And very reasonably priced.
Yeah, no, and they were very helpful. I mean, apparently too, they had everything I was looking for, and I had a list. They did not have out on the shelf, but he was able to find all of it by going downstairs into the basement, where they apparently have an incredibly large additional inventory.
Yeah.
So
and they also had all those little yellow pamphlets. What were they again?
Oh yeah, they had like all the journals from the Baker Street Irregulars. Well, not all of them, but they had a lot.
A lot, and they weren't in order. Else we probably would have looked for something Brett related. But
right. Yeah.
We really only had minutes to be in there.
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. Well, let's take a minute to talk about us, because we've actually had a few emails come in asking a little bit about Gus and Luke and what we do. And we'll get to some listener emails actually in just a minute, but I felt like we might as well discuss our big project that we've been consumed with lately, and which, is partially to blame for the slow release of this episode. We've just been so busy because we finished a movie, a feature film, a sci-fi horror thriller, I'm not sure what you call it, a time travel movie.
All those things.
A puzzle movie.
Yeah.
Checks a lot of boxes, but it's a movie called Intersect, and it's something we started quite a few years ago and was put on hold many times while we went off and made other projects, and we kind of just got around to finishing it.
But in terms of making this movie, what that means is Gus was the director and writer, and I was the director of photography, but we also did, editing and coloring and everything else that needed.
Right. It's a very indie film.
Yeah.
And so, when you watch a movie and at the end it says, this movie created 25,000 jobs. Well, Luke and I did 24,992 of those jobs. So it was kind of like a passion project of sorts, which it's really strange to have a passion project that starts 10 years ago and then finally finish it now.
Yeah.
But
maybe that's how most of them work.
Maybe so. But in reality, even though we've made other things since then, this was actually our first film that we ever made, and it's just now basically getting a release. So it's going to have its world premiere at the Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival on February 12th, and we've been in discussion with numerous distributors, so it'll be coming out on, iTunes and other places where you can watch
digital
movies.
platforms.
Yeah, digital platforms. Shortly thereafter, we haven't got actual dates yet for that, but it's exciting. I mean, it's a lot of work, and it's taken up a lot of our time, and we're glad to get it out there and glad it's almost done. But that's what we've been up to lately, and that's kind of what we're always up to when we're not recording the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes podcast.
Yeah.
Working on one movie or another, or different projects, podcasts, commercials, different things that we work on.
But this is just something that's been lingering for a long time, and
yeah,
we're proud of it. So
it feels really good to be done with it.
Yeah,
and it kind of captures a moment in our lives 10 years ago,
for sure,
for the most part. But we've learned a lot. I think we would change a lot if we could make this movie now and had a budget for it, which we didn't have back in the day. But
yeah,
all those things being said, yeah, we're definitely quite proud of it and quite excited to put it out in the world and to have people look at it, think about it, talk about it. It's definitely a brain teaser.
It's a puzzle movie.
Yeah.
And I'm actually most looking forward to people critiquing it and negative comments, because there's a lot of thought put into how the thing goes, and it's confusing, and you really have to pay attention. But I will be curious to see what people nitpick about.
Yeah, I'm not hopeful that the response is going to be quickly positive, because I think it's the kind of movie people really are going to have to think about and frankly put some effort into watching, because
effort is a good word.
Yeah. It's not the kind of movie you just sit back and it washes over you. You got to think about it. It's just a strange time travel movie. It's slow burn, told out of sequence. A lot of Lovecraftian elements to it. I mean, I'm a big Lovecraft fan.
There's a lot of genre stuff in it. And,
nods to things like the Twilight Zone and the Time Machine, and there's even a nod to Hellraiser in there at one point.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I mean, if that sounds like something you want to put effort into, and you live in the Boston area,
yeah, come out and see it. We're going to be there in Boston with some of the cast and crew. And speaking of the cast and crew, the movie stars mostly unknown indie actors, but James Morrison is in it. For anybody who watched 24 or the new Twin Peaks, or he's in a lot of stuff.
Space Above and Beyond.
Space Above and Beyond,
one of our favorite shows.
Yeah, we really liked that show back in the 90s. Surprisingly, a friend of ours named Richard Dawkins, who's a fairly famous writer and biologist, was nice enough to lend his voice to the movie. So he plays the voice of the artificial intelligence computer in the movie, which was funny because when we asked him to do it, he was like, "Why don't you just get Stephen Hawking to do the voice?" And I was like, "Well, anybody can do Stephen Hawking's voice with a computer." So That was kind of strange. But one of our leads is a gentleman by the name of Jason Spizak, who is a very famous voice actor. He's known for Young Justice, Star Wars, Clone Wars. He's in
He's in a lot of video games, Fortnite.
Yeah,
all sorts.
Yeah, the list goes on and on. But and a lot of talent that people have never met before. First timers in our movie. There's a gentleman by the name of Abe Ruthless, who we're quite pleased to work with. He's a rabble rouser and he's a fun guy.
He's a punk.
Yeah. A nice lady by the name of Leanne Deering contributed her talents. And a lot of good kids. We had some young actors as well, because our movie jumps around in time a lot, so we get to know some of our characters when they were kids. So it's an interesting project, and I hope that eventually you'll all get to see it, and we'll, when it comes out and it's available for download and purchase and all that kind of stuff, we'll let you know. And
you can critique it for us.
You can tear it to shreds and let us know what you thought. But anybody in Boston, come on out and hang out with us at the festival.
Come say what up.
Yeah.
And if you are interested in looking into the movie, you can visit our website, which is intersectthemovie.com, and we will put links in the show notes.
Yeah. Well, I say we get to some listener emails. What do you think?
Let's do it.
We have an email here from Mike. He writes in to say, "Great podcast. Thanks so much for doing it. It certainly gets 10 Persian slippers from me. Whoop. I've been a fan of the production since I was a kid, and it's always nice to see how many other fans of the series there are still out there. I always found it interesting from the costume design perspective that Jeremy Brett has multiple deerstalkers. In the first season, he wears at least 3 different ones. In my mind, I always assumed that Holmes only owned one, the deerstalker, so to speak. Thoughts or information on the decision to go with several versions? Thanks, Mike." Well, Mike, I wish I could say we had an answer to that. I mean, I know what you mean, though. There is definitely more than one version in the first season, if we would call this first 13 episodes a season, because in The Solitary Cyclist, he's got that one that's very, it's almost kind of cheap looking,
Yeah, really thin.
Yeah, and he's got that gray, it's kind of like it matches the thin gray jacket that he's wearing.
But I think that might be your answer.
What, that is cheap?
That it matches.
Oh.
I think there's 2 possible, reasons. One being just costume design, maybe got a bigger budget, and so they got nicer stuff. Or, like both of us have multiple hats.
Right.
And, I don't personally like wear them with different outfits, but
yeah,
maybe Holmes is a hat collector. And if you look at the Paget illustrations, he definitely is.
Sure.
I mean, I commented there's been at least 2 Homburgs.
Yeah.
2 different Homburgs. So, I mean, maybe he's just got style.
Yeah. Or maybe, maybe the costume department found one and said, dang, I wish we had this one back then. Let's switch to it.
Yeah. Or they lost it, or who knows? Somebody stole it.
Yeah. Angie writes in to say, "Hi, I grew up watching the Jeremy Brett series as a teen/kid. And I'm absolutely loving that you point out some of the things I noticed in the episodes for years. One that comes to mind is the 'to eat it' delivery in The Blue Carbuncle, and the oddly long sequence in The Solitary Cyclist that focuses on the clergyman leaving the pub.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear some of your thoughts on the odder, padded episodes later. Also, Stephen Fry is awesome. Signed, Angie." Thanks, Angie. Yeah, I mean, it's so great to hear people write in and tell us that they too catch these things.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think that's why we even started doing it, is because we would kind of force people to watch it and then point those things out to them.
Yeah.
So now we're just, we're leaving it out on the internet somewhere, and if people want it forced on them, they can have it.
Exactly. Lynn writes in to say, "Hello. In the Dancing Men podcast, you questioned when Jeremy Brett's Holmes wears the deerstalker cap. I have noticed that he only wears the cap in the stories where the Sidney Paget illustrations show him wearing it. Of course, Conan Doyle never specifically stated that Holmes was wearing a deerstalker cap, though in one of the stories he does say he was wearing a cloth cap. I'm not totally certain about that. You may very well be right that he only wears them in the episodes where Sidney Paget drew him wearing them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about that. I have not paid that level of attention to it, so I will look forward to doing that moving forward.
Yeah, I have to say I haven't either, but what I have noticed, and somebody pointed that out to us at one point, was that he only wore the deerstalker like when he went out into the country.
Right.
And so maybe that was a theme that they carried on, even if it wasn't illustrated that way.
I mean, I would be surprised if they deviated from the illustrations where they had illustrations.
Right.
But I think we already have seen that at least once, though. I think there was at least one moment so far where he did wear it, and it wasn't in the story, and I can't remember which one it was now.
But not deviating, just
right.
It wasn't drawn.
Right, exactly. Well, Lynn goes on to say, in the Naval Treaty podcast, you mentioned an alternate theory of the solution of the case. When you get to the Hound of the Baskervilles episode, there is an alternate theory in Pierre Bayard's book, Sherlock Holmes Was Wrong, which you may not be aware of and would be worth a mention. Keep up the great work. I'm looking forward to enjoying more of your observations. Well, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, definitely thank you for pointing that one out. I made a note of it, so when we get to that one, we will examine that alternate theory in full. Our next email is from the Reverend Larry W. Rao Sr. Reverend Rao says, I have loved Jeremy Brett's portrayal of Sherlock Holmes since I watched Mystery Theater on PBS. I actually worked in the control room of WVPBS during this time, and Jeremy is my favorite characterization of Holmes. I found your podcast this summer, and it entertained me as I mowed the grass and worked our vegetable garden. I know Sherlockians are very close to script with the canon, but I find Elementary fascinating and would like to know what you think of that series. I enjoy the way the modern writers slip in things from the canon in such a way that it makes you say, yes, Holmes was ignorant about the solar system, or a reference to a canonical story. A fan of Sherlock Holmes, Jeremy Brett, and both you guys, I remain, Reverend Larry. Well, Larry, I actually have never seen the Elementary series, I have to admit.
I haven't either.
You haven't? I do like Johnny Lee Miller. I've liked him in things in the past. I just, I gotta be honest, the reason I haven't watched it is because it's an American show. And it makes me not want to watch it for some strange reason.
I get a little bit of that, and a little bit of, I'm not the biggest Johnny Lee Miller fan, but also mainly just, I haven't given it the time. I'm not a big TV watcher.
Yeah.
And I just came across Miss Sherlock. Have you heard about this?
No.
It's a Japanese female Sherlock and Watson.
Yeah.
And I'm actually more interested to watch that. Just because I just see exactly how much they change.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's Japanese versus American, which I don't know why, it just doesn't seem right.
I feel like I will watch Elementary at some point. I think I will. I don't know. I feel like there's so many shows these days, and even though it's Sherlock Holmes, and even though we're super fans, I don't know. There's just something about it has always made me not want to sit down and start it, but I think I will at some point.
I feel like it was like the commercials that used to play for it. Like they were too fantastical or happy. And I don't know.
Yeah, too American.
Too American.
But I'm glad you like it, and we'll give it a shot at some point, and I'm sure we'll talk about it when we do. Paul writes in to say, hello, just a brief note to thank you for your wonderful podcast. I've been a long-time aficionado of Jeremy Brett's Holmes since I watched it on the first UK run back in the 80s. The episodes that forever stuck in my mind include The Man with the Twisted Lip, with Hugh Boone's memorable quotations, especially, "My strength is as the strength of 10 because my heart is pure," which my brothers and I often used to bandy about, and the unforgettable closing shot of Neville St. Clair casting his rags into the fire. I mean, yeah, that's a great episode. I can't wait to get to it.
So many things that just come to mind, like him screaming out the window and pulling himself into the room.
Yeah. If you prick us, do we not bleed?
That gigantic sponge.
Yeah, the slow motion washing of his face. Yeah. Well, we'll get there soon. Paul goes on to say, one other thing I don't believe I've heard you mention yet are the audiobooks, a couple of which I owned on cassette. I believe they were specially recorded rather than simply taken from the TV series. I owned The Musgrave Ritual, but I don't know how many others were made. Do you have any information on them? Well, yes, I had heard of them, but until I received your email, Paul, I had not thought to scoop them up. So being a crazy super fan, once I read your note, I had to. And I can confirm that the only two I've been able to track down, which I'm pretty sure are the only two that exist based on the liner notes inside of the cassette, are The Musgrave Ritual, which also included The Second Stain in one, and The Man with the Twisted Lip and The Priory School in the other. And I haven't had a chance to listen to them all the way through, but what they are actually clips from the show, but they include narration from another gentleman who reads. It's like it's not unlike our podcast, actually. It's like someone reading a new script which kind of describes the episode, and then clips from the show. The clips tend to be really long. I mean, I think they run at least an hour, these tapes.
I was going to say, I wonder if it's a case of, like, they try to squeeze it all into one side of tape.
Yeah.
And so they have to do some narration to get you in between while you're looking at dolly shots or something.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I haven't listened to every one of them or all the way through, but it definitely, the one, I checked out Musgrave Ritual, and I think it was the Priory School. I think I listened to both of those a little bit, and it was just clips from the show. And the narration, and they're fine. They're cool. I was thinking I might actually, when I get around to it, transfer them and include them in the podcast somewhere, maybe on our Patreon page, or maybe just as a bonus episode or something like that when we get to those episodes. But they're okay. They're nothing. I wouldn't seek them out if you're a collector unless you just want to have everything. But they're okay.
You also have to seek out a cassette player.
That's true. That is definitely true. Well, Paul finally says, another vote for Clive Marison's radio series, in my humble opinion, the only actor who comes close to Jeremy Brett's portrayal. Indeed, they share much in common, I feel. He says, I first discovered your podcast while on a long bus journey to London. As I listened to one of the episodes, the bus passed the Holmes Museum on Baker Street, in front of which a ponderous queue snaked. Testament, I think, to the immortal nature of the great detective. Regards, Paul. Yeah, Paul, thanks. And we agree. I mean, that museum always has a line.
Yeah, we've been a few times, and it's crazy. There's always a line, and the gift shop's always overflowing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. Scott wrote in to say, I'm sure you're aware of the fan site The British Empire, which is www.british.com. I was thinking that Bretons would be a good play on Bretons, as in the old Lord Kitchener recruitment posters with the words Britons, and under his pointing finger, wants you. And this is obviously Scott's replying to our trying to think of a name for Brett fans.
Yeah.
We've thrown a few out there, and we have some other emails with some other suggestions. But yeah, no, that's a nice suggestion. Bretons.
Yeah, Bretons.
As to the melancholy factor mentioned in the afterwards, the show, Holmes, Brett, cast and crew, all feel like longtime friends. If I hear the theme or any of its show variations, the goosebumps commence, and watching the show is like a memory of those once close, now gone, placed before the eyes rather than behind them. I'll just pause there and say, that nails it.
Definitely.
That's the feeling I think we all get. And, we have some friends, quite a few friends actually, who we've recently just introduced to this show, and they're already looking forward to watching it a second time. So we'll see how, for the young generation who hasn't seen it before, how quickly they start to develop those feelings.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see.
They've already told us there's no other Holmes.
Yeah, exactly. It's always good to hear.
Yeah.
Scott goes on to say, a melancholy I remember, and perhaps you can answer the question that follows it, is my ex-wife was in England days after Brett's death. She happened to be in Westminster, I believe, and she saw a wreath with a black top hat and cane on prominent display. She thought it might have been for Brett, but didn't ask. Do you know if any such memorial was done for Mr. Brett? Was he buried at Westminster or nearby? Anyways, keep up the good work. Most sincerely, Scott. Thanks so much, Scott. Well, I don't actually know if that memorial that she saw was for Jeremy Brett. If anybody out there does know, if something like that happened. We'd love to hear that kind of trivia. I do know that Jeremy Brett was cremated, and from what I've been able to find out, his ashes were given to family and friends. So there actually, as far as I know, is not a headstone anywhere or a place to go visit.
Could have just been a sympathetic Sherlockian at Westminster.
There'll be a lot to talk about with regards to Jeremy's last days, but we're going to save all that until the very end when we get there. But let's do one more email and then wrap it up. This one's from Nick. He says, "Hey guys, it's not often that I email a podcast. However, I felt compelled after discovering you on YouTube, interviewing the legendary Stephen Fry, then listening to the first few episodes, which I have to say are fantastic. It's hard to categorize my relationship with Sherlock Holmes. I'm certainly no expert on the subject. However, he has been with me in many steps of my life. Growing up in Stockport, a town 5 miles south of Manchester city centre, I watched many episodes of the original run and the subsequent repeats. As part of a high school media studies trip, we went on the Granada Studios tour and walked around Baker Street, looked inside 221B, and saw various props and costumes from the show. Sometime in the 80s, my dad bought me a beautifully bound book of the complete Sherlock Holmes, and I read it all. I've since revisited various episodes of the show several times over the years, and dined at the Sherlock Holmes pub in London. But I think the biggest connection to the show is that my dad's best friend worked at Granada. I haven't seen Steve Moran for some time, or discussed the show with my dad in years. However, from memory, I do believe that Steve worked on set in some capacity, set design maybe, and he was very close to the production, and, as such, we have this rare item sitting in my dad's living room. And Nick includes a photo here of one of the 6 Napoleons.
A rare item indeed.
That is a rare item. And maybe we'll upload that photo for the Twitter feed. But yeah, so he goes on to say, as you probably remember, there was a whole shelf of these built for the show that were smashed in the story. Very few survived, but Steve managed to procure one for my dad and one for himself. Nick goes on to say, another thing I remember is that Steve had a menagerie of exotic pets, so if Granada TV ever needed a tarantula, scorpion, hissing cockroach, snake, or whatever, Steve would either provide them or source them. I also believe that, sadly, Steve lost his job due to the rise of reality television, as it was so cheap to make and they didn't require sets with the advent of this low-cost, high-profit boom. Granada pretty much abandoned these lavish and expensive shows for the mundanity of home video clips and in-studio game shows. But I digress, and don't want to end on a downer. Keep up the great work, lads, and you get extra bonus points for the correct pronunciation of Derbyshire in the episode The Dancing Men. Not a lot of Americans get that right. Cheers, Nick. Thanks, Nick. We're always tempted to say Derbyshire, like she does in the episode, just for fun.
But, speaking of what he said earlier, I wonder if in the future there will be a podcast about the real world.
What do you mean?
Will people look back on reality TV with any amount of fondness, or will it just be garbage?
Oh, garbage.
Garbage.
But I was so happy when Nick sent in those. He sent us a few pictures of the Napoleon bust, and we're in the process of trying to, frankly, replicate it. So
we're in the process of doing about 45 things. But I do really want to have my own Napoleon. So
me too.
We're working on that.
I feel like worst case scenario, if everything else in our lives falls apart, we will end up with a screen replica version of the Napoleon. And then at very least you and I will have one. So I think at very least we'll be able to make a mold.
Yeah.
And
we'll have 3.
Yeah.
One other thing we should point out, which we did point out on Twitter, but it's worth pointing out again, we have done a year now of episodes on the Sherlock podcast.
That's true. This is actually episode 12, technically, I believe.
Yeah.
Two of those are interview episodes, but...
Yeah, well, that's all right.
Yeah.
I mean, we never really, mandated a
schedule.
Yeah. But it's cool. I mean, I actually didn't think it had been going that long.
Yeah.
It was funny because we weren't even promoting it at first. We were just kind of recording them and putting them out without telling even any of our family members. We were just doing it.
Yeah.
So it's pretty crazy that, it's been a year and everybody's listening. They're still listening.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And we got a lot of stuff coming up. I'm a little hesitant to announce anything yet.
There's something fancy.
Well, there is a fancy one coming. I don't think anybody's going to see it coming. And
You're not going to see it coming.
I'll warn you right now, it's not David Burke. If that was coming, we'd tell you.
It's not fancy in that regard.
Yes, but it's something...
You won't expect it, though.
Yeah, no one will expect this Spanish Inquisition.
And hopefully you'll even like it.
I hope people like it. It's going to be something different. But yeah, we've got a few cool things on the horizon, and we'll keep you updated on everything, including our movies, of which there are more than one in the works. So there's lots going on. But it has been a year, and so we just wanted to thank you, everybody listening, so much. I mean, I know we say it at the end of every episode, but it's been a great year, and however long it takes, we are going to get through this series.
Definitely.
And with the movie coming, it is possible we might find ourselves getting busy again. Hard to say, but we love doing this show, and we're going to keep doing it.
And we've got an absolute beauty coming up next.
That's correct.
Satan. What could it be?
Stay tuned to find out. Okay, well, that was another top-notch episode of the Granada series. As always, we'd like to welcome our new friends, followers, and subscribers out there. We're very glad you're with us. Please remember to like and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SherlockPod. And if you'd like to share your thoughts on any of the topics we've covered, please do drop us a line at contact@SherlockPodcast.com. And if you'd like to help us keep the lights on here, we have a Patreon account where we do have some exclusive bonus videos for subscribers. So please consider joining us there at patreon.com/SherlockPodcast. It will probably come as no surprise that I, for one, am very excited about the next episode. It's one of my all-time favorites, maybe even my number one favorite. We'll have to see how it holds up. But I am, of course, referring to The Resident Patient. Look forward to seeing you then.